Hey everybody, it's Bo Brotherton from Better Together Life. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited about this video because basically, let me tell you about this. So Kelly and our 4 kids, we are getting our house ready to sell, and we are very, very close to actually selling it. And we're gonna be moving to our 7 acres in Central Texas. And we are going to try to grow our own food. We've never done that before. Repeat, we have never grown our own food before. We've had the garden and we've had the rabbits, but like in terms of growing the substantial amount of our own food and living in rural America, we've never done this. We've only lived in suburbia. What I'm gonna be doing here is a little series where we are trying to talk with people that are doing this right now. They are growing their own food. And I am very, very stoked to bring you Daniel Arms from the Arms Family Homestead channel. Put his link down below so you can find him. A lot of y'all know Daniel. And honestly, this dude is legit. Like, he knows what he is doing in terms of growing his own food, raising animals, and hunting as well. This is his life. This is what he's grown up doing. He does it without even thinking. Today we're going to be talking with Daniel about goats. He is an expert on goats. Let's go ahead and jump right on into it. Daniel Arms Family Homestead.
Awesome, everybody. Thank y'all for coming to our YouTube channel, Better Together Life. We are here with Daniel Arms of the Arms Family Homestead. He is going to talk to us today about goats and his expertise, because as y'all know, on our homestead, it is about 60% wooded, and I have no idea anything about anything in terms of homesteading. So, Daniel, how are you, man?
I'm good. I almost overslept your call this morning. I never sleep in, but I had work last night and I didn't get home till after midnight. And usually I'm up at 6 o'clock when the sun pops up. I'm out of bed. And this morning I woke up at 7:30, kind of in a panic. Thought I was going to miss our call.
Well, yeah, man. Just to let you know about like both of our audiences of why you popped into my mind to do my first little collaboration video, because what this is aimed at is Kelly and I have zero experience of anything of what we're doing with how to grow our own food or animals at all, and we still have a little while. We still have 6 months until we're able to even make that process, because we just now had a newborn. So what I'm wanting to do is to get these videos and interviews with you guys that are actually doing it. And the reason why I thought of you first was because whenever we first started talking, you said that you never heard of the word or term homesteading until it became trendy. Like, that was just something that you grew up with, that this is just your life of having animals and having a garden, that's just life.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I mean, I'd heard of the word homesteading, but I didn't know people in today's world really use that a lot. And I'd never associated what we were doing with the word homesteading, because, and maybe I'm wrong, but when I think of the word homesteader, I think of like the Alaska mountain men that go out and chop down their trees and they build a cabin and they live off the land 100%. And it really wasn't until I got deeper into YouTube and realized there's a huge community of like-minded people that all associate with that word homesteading. And like I said, I'd never called this place a homestead. This was just home. There was no stead. It was just home. And that's kind of the way I grew up. I grew up on this property. And left and went to school and worked for several years. My dad passed away, and then we moved back. But the word homestead or homesteading, really, like I said, I didn't dive into that until I got into this community of so many awesome, incredible people that are doing the same things that we're doing. Whether some of them are in town on a small lot, some of them are on a half acre, some of them are on a ranch. We've got 110 acres. And really, most of it's just hunting property. We only I use all of it, but as far as the gardens and the goats and all that, I mean, we use a very small portion of it. So I think a lot of people get in this thought in their mind that they're not going to be able to live off the land, so to speak, or for a percentage of their food if they don't have a huge plot of land. But YouTube is awesome, and I've learned so much about so many people who are growing, the majority of their food off of, a small, very, very small piece of land.
So I'll follow up with that. Like if you had to scale it all the way down as much as you could, what do you think, how much property you think that you would need in order to grow 50% of your food? Whether someone who's really doing this, like, that might not be you, but if someone that wants to really grow 50% or more of their food, how much property do you think you would need in terms of animals and garden?
It just depends. If you're talking about raising animals, then it's going to take a little more land. If you're just gardening and just producing, fruits and vegetables, gosh, way less than an acre, you can do so much. I've got a neighbor who's a market gardener who, for the last 7 or 8 years, they've lived on a half an acre, and they're making a living because they follow so many of these like organic market gardeners, Jean Martin and Curtis Stone. They grow like those guys, so they grow an enormous amount of food on such a very small piece of land. But if you're going to bring animals into it, goats don't take up a lot of room, but most people, once they get into this, they're not going to want to be buying feed every day. So they're obviously going to need some pastures if they can rotational graze to keep the parasites down and the grass in good shape. Goats or sheep aren't going to take up a lot of space. You can do that on a relatively small piece of land, 5 acres. I think yours is going to be 7?
Yeah. If
you have it, cross fenced where you can rotate, you can raise a lot of animals on a small piece of property. Now, cows, if you're going to get into cattle, I'm not an expert on cattle, but we raise 1 or 2 every now and then to butcher. But we can raise 1 steer or heifer or whatever it is, get it up to 1,100, 1,200 pounds and butcher, and it lasts us 2 years. So one animal will last us 2 years, and we're a family of 5.
Yeah.
Now, that's not eating at home every single day, but because we're busy, our kids are all involved in sports, so we're out and about a lot. But, a 1,200-pound steer will last you a long time. But, you could raise, if you just bought 1 and raised it and tried to grass feed it, it wouldn't take, you could do it on less than 5 acres for sure, just strictly grass fed if you manage your grass right.
So how much does if you buy just a calf, a steer, like how much does that cost? Just buying that?
It depends on the market in your area. It's so most of them usually always sold by the pound, unless you just get to know a local producer and say, hey, I want to buy 1 animal, just to raise and butcher. And it really depends on the size. I want to say right now, most everything around our area is about $2 a pound.
Okay.
So if you buy a 200-pound steer, you're going to spend way less than if you buy, one that's say 800 pounds.
Yeah.
But an 800-pound steer, you're not going to have to raise for near as long to get to a butcher weight. So
exactly. Okay.
It's hard to say, everything's different with different breeds. And
what breed did y'all do?
It's really a crossbreed. I've got a cousin that raises show animals, so he's huge in the show circuit with all of his nieces, and he doesn't have kids, but he has tons of nieces and nephews. And he'll do artificial breeding. So he'll take a cow that he may go off and buy that's from a show line, and they'll do an embryo flush, pull all the embryos, artificially breed them, and then put those embryos in recipient cows. Wow. It's a very technical process, but you're talking about making tens of thousands of dollars per calf anyways.
Yeah.
So what he does is, if he has a show calf that doesn't sell, that no one comes by because it doesn't quite meet the line of show stock, then he sells those cheaper. So that's where we usually get our 1 or 2. And we don't have one right now because we've got, a whole freezer full of beef, and we haven't started another one. So.
Wow.
But this is supposed to be a goats.
I know, man. You start talking about cattle, I'm like, man, that's what I would eventually love to be able to do that. I like hamburgers a whole lot.
And that's the thing. We mostly eat beef. My family doesn't prefer goat. We've eaten goat, and it actually tastes good, but the thing with beef, you can raise one animal, butcher it, and you're good. Like I said, we're good for almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Goats, you're talking about butchering a 50 or 75-pound animal versus, one that's over 1,000. So you would be butchering a lot more goats, and my family's just not. I don't mind. I'll do it. I'll butcher our chickens or rabbits or whatever. But my family's not quite. Not quite there yet.
Well, so okay,
maybe someday, but.
So that's a great lead into what I really wanted to talk to you about, because a lot of this came from your video, and I'll put a link up in the description thing. And I never really thought, I just, nobody has ever done a video, or like I haven't seen something that talks about, here are goats that we raised and we sold them, and that you made money from them. And that's where, and then, so I think it was that. And then also around about that time, I think Justin Rhodes was at Joel Salatin's farm, Polyface Farms. And he said something about goats that that it usually takes about 5 years for someone to really get the groove of raising goats. And at about that time is whenever the goats have ate themselves out of a job, because they've eaten all the forage. I mean, they've cleared your land of all the brush and everything that's there. And again, I have no idea what I'm talking about. That's why you're here. So that got me to think. I'm like, man, I just need to be able to talk to Daniel and see what your thought is on goats, because my property is 7 acres. It's in central Texas. You're in southern Oklahoma, right?
Central Oklahoma.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's not that far. I mean, it's not that much of a difference. Of course, it's a little bit different. But as I look at your property right now, it reminds me of a lot of places in Texas. But if you were to advise someone to say, like, hey, we want to be able to have goats as a slightly smaller, easier to handle animal to be around kids.
Yep.
And just to kind of cut our teeth with a bigger animal, because right now we're just having rabbits, and to have those animals clear the property and not give us the biggest headache. I don't know that we haven't really decided if we're interested in milking goats. A lot of people I've talked to, like Art and Bree, I talked to them and they said that their goat's milk is okay. I don't know. Maybe they love it now. But it didn't really seem like people are loving goat's milk as much as it's supposed to be. So you raising goats, and they did a job for you, and you sold them for meat instead of being forced to eat them yourself. You made money off of them. So if you could tell us your story and anything like that.
Okay, so for us, we switched to goats. Let's see, my daughter Emily is 9 now. We got our first goats when she was about 2. And it really started off one day. My wife came home and was like, hey, some guy asked me if I wanted 2 bottle baby goats for Emily. And I was really, my parents had goats when I was a little bitty kid. I was raised on goat's milk. I didn't want to milk goats, but she said, no, these are just 2 pygmy goats that are somebody, their mama didn't take them and they're needing somebody to bottle feed them because these people don't have time. I said, okay, bring them home. She brings them home literally in a diaper box. There's 2 baby goats. Pygmy goats are a very small breed anyways, but these babies were literally like the size of a little Yorkie at the time. And they were the cutest little things ever. And we started raising them on a bottle, and it was cold. So we kind of had them in like a dog crate in our house at night. And then we'd let them out and during the day in our yard. That was perfect until they got a couple months old and they're old enough to jump on everything. And they tore up our grill, and anything you put on the porch, they were pooping on. And so then they got moved down to the barn, and their names were Johnny and June. And they were just 2 goats. I mean, we just, for no real reason other than pets. But our kids fell in love with them. My wife really enjoyed them. And we had cattle. My dad had cattle on this property for several years. It's 110 acres, but it's so brushy it would only support about 10 to 12. And any more than that, there wasn't enough grass, so then you were buying too much hay. Well, just naturally, after my dad passed away, I kind of just took over the cattle herd. And it was like, all right, so we can only have 10 or 12. They cost us more money than we're making because we're having to buy hay and feed all winter long. It just wasn't, I wasn't expecting to make a lot of money on those cows, but it was like in the negative big time. So what's the point? So we had those 2 goats. And I said, well, why don't we get a few more goats? So we just kind of blindly went out and bought a few goats here and there. And they were just kind of just run of the mill, just whatever somebody had for sale on the internet at the time, or in the newspaper, or somebody was giving away a couple goats, and they really weren't worth much at all. And so we kind of slowly started building. And then we thought, well, if we're going to do this, are we going to eat them? Or we're not going to milk them because we don't have time for the schedule of milk goats. But if we're going to do this, why don't we start getting, into a breed of goats that are actually worth a little bit of money? So we got into boars. Boar goats are the white with the red head that they're originally from South Africa, but they're a meat goat, and they are probably the most popular breed of meat goats in the United States nowadays. And that's what 4-H and FFA kids show in their livestock shows. Well, we started getting into those, and they're very high maintenance. They're not real good mothers. They get worms really bad. They're really susceptible to parasites. You have to trim their hooves all the time, but they're worth a little more. Well, so we did that for a couple of years, and it's not like we were trying to go out and just make a huge income off of them, but I didn't want them to be in the negative. Well, Kiko goats kind of started popping up in our area. There were a few people. Goats got really popular in Oklahoma, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. They just exploded. The goat market just blew up. Everyone was starting to buy goats, and I really didn't know why. But a lot of people were switching to Kikos, so I started researching Kikos. They were originally a feral goat from New Zealand, I believe. They were kind of taken in and crossbred with a couple other breeds to kind of make them more of a domestic animal. And the Kikos aren't parasite. They don't have any parasite problems. You don't have to trim their hooves. They do really, really, really well on natural browse and just grazing. They don't require as much feed to put on weight as a boar goat. So we kind of started making that transition. And Kikos are getting really popular right now, and I really like them. They're since they were a feral goat, originally, they're the best mothers I've ever seen. I mean, most of my babies are born right around the 1st of January, which it's still. I mean, Oklahoma's not just super cold, but we still have below freezing, and you never know when an ice storm or snow is going to come in. And I've seen babies born with snow on the ground, and the mama just gets them up, cleans them off, and off they go. They do excellent. They just don't require much help. So for us, I was looking for something that was low maintenance, that doesn't require a lot of input, because the less money I put into them, the more I make on the back end when I sell.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to make a huge income for us. We're on this farm, and I want to keep the biggest thing for us really is we want to keep that farm exemption on our taxes, so we can write things off on our taxes. So the goats, if I tallied it up at the end of the year, everything I put into them versus everything I make profit, it's not like, wow, we made a couple $1,000s profit. But when you figure in what we get to keep on our taxes, having that farm exemption really, really helps us, because we can write off so many things that we need to use and do on our property with the tractor and, things like that. So it's not all about, okay, let's go out and buy 50 goats because they're going to all sell a baby and raise 50 babies and all make, $200 per kid, and we're going to make all this money. It's about us. It's about, okay, let's make a little bit of profit, but have a way to keep that farm exemption. Because I know the channel Homesteading, I don't know if you follow him or not, Homesteading, he does a live shows and podcasts all the time, but he was talking about they have to, in his state, which I want to say it's like somewhere in the Northeast. I'm not exactly sure. I can't quote where he's from, but they have to have $2,000 in income to keep their farm exemption. So for them, he raises pigs, meat pigs, to sell to other people for, for pork.
Yeah.
And that allows him to keep his farm exemption. Oklahoma doesn't necessarily have to have a specific income number, but I like to be able to show I'm at least making an effort on my farm to produce something to make an income.
Yeah. Did Oklahoma call it a farm exemption? Because Texas, everybody calls it a ag exemption.
Well, in Oklahoma, it's just the slang term is just a farm exemption.
Okay.
I mean, the technical term is probably an ag exemption.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be animals. You could be producing hay or
Yeah.
vegetables or whatever it is. But the goats, for me, like I said, I've got all this brush. You can see behind me, it's all just timber other than what I clear out just with the tractor. And the goats do a really good job of keeping the undergrowth trimmed up, 5 or 6 feet tall. They love leaves. Everybody says a goat will eat anything. That is so not true. A goat will eat anything if he has to. If you pin him up and he's forced in a small pen to eat what's there, he'll eat almost anything.
Yeah.
But if you turn them out where they have room to roam, 99 times out of 100, they'll walk around and pick all the leaves off the trees before they ever eat grass off the ground.
Yeah.
So that's why people do rotational grazing. If you got a small property, if you just turn all of your animals out on 5 acres, they're going to go around and just pick. They're going to be like a little kid. If you just turn a little kid loose in your kitchen, and say, go find supper, they're going to eat ice cream and cookies until it's all gone. But if you rotate pastures with those goats and you go, all right, you've got this half acre for the next couple of days, that's all Joel Salatin preaches. That's what Joel Salatin's about. That's why he does all the rotational grazing with his cattle. Turn them out on a small property or a small piece of land, they're going to eat what's there tomorrow. They just, do the same thing.
Is that what you're doing on your property? Are you rotational grazing?
I'm not doing a rotational grazing because I've got 110 acres and only 25 goats. They will never run out of food.
Gotcha.
I've got way more land than I need, honestly, and way less goats than it'll hold. They'll never eat all the brush, and I don't plan on ever filling this 100 acres up with goats because I'm not trying to be a full-time goat farmer.
Well, it's hunting property.
Right. The land I live on is a hunting property first for me. I grew up hunting. I love hunting. That's just a passion of mine. I'm actually, a little plug for something else, I'm actually on the pro staff of a nationally airing hunting show. It's called Final Descent Outdoors.
Awesome.
And a friend of mine started it several years ago. It's a Christian-based hunting show, and there is actually a 3 to 5 minute devotional at the end of every episode.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, we're on the Pursuit channel, so check it out. Pursuit channel is on Dish Network, DirecTV, everything. So Final Descent Outdoors.
Great, yeah.
Great.
Send me a link and I'll put it down in the description.
Okay, so that's, like I said, hunting and fishing is what I grew up doing. The farming, as far as the goats go, that's just a small piece of what this property is about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a little different than if you were going to do it on 5 acres.
Yeah. So have you, if you were to rotationally graze, how do you think you would do that? Because my property is pretty rectangular. It's more
right.
It's long north and south, and so going east and west is pretty narrow compared to north and south. But like I said, there's a big forest right in the middle that I kind of want to keep. I just want to keep that there just for wildlife. It's only like 3 acres of it is forested like that, but everything around it is about 50-50 wooded and cleared.
Right.
But really, so would goats do well with doing like electric fencing and fencing around? So we, in our back piece of our property, the south side of our property, it's really mixed with like some fields of like an oak tree there, and then mesquite, and there's some dewberries and poison ivy, and yopon, like just a lot of just what you think of as brush. But it's kind of grouped in these nice, like you can walk around. Like if I would have like this group of brush, I could walk all the way around it.
Right.
And then there's another one and another one.
In Oklahoma, we call those thickets.
Okay.
So if you got all this grassland and there's a spot of trees here and a clump of trees here, we call that a thicket.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just our term we use, but I know what you're talking about.
I think that's probably the term.
Brush.
Yeah, talking to someone who's never done this life, I'm like, yes, thicket. That's what it is.
Okay, so as far as the hot wire with goats, I tried a hot wire several times because I wanted to keep them away from the house. I had almost zero success with a hot wire with goats.
Okay.
I would put up, 4, 5, 6 strands of hot wire.
Wow.
I never did try the chicken netting that Justin Rhodes does.
Yeah.
That might work because they can't go through it. With the strands of electric hot wire, a goat's hair is so thick. If they ever get their head through, they'll just push right through it because there's no resistance. That wire, it's not like a super tight fence. Mm-hmm. Usually, if it'll shock them, if they stick their head up to it and it shocks their nose or somewhere around the eyes where there's less hair, they'll back up. But not always. A lot of times, if they get their head through and then it shocks them, they'll just go straight through.
Because it's like it's shocking them, so they want to run away.
They want to run from it. They don't run backwards. They run forward.
Yeah.
So I had very little success with electric fence for goats. The only success I had was I had a 3-wire hot wire around my garden for years, and it would keep the goats out. Goats, I don't know if this makes sense, but the hot wire would keep the goats out of a small enclosed space. But if I put them in there, like in the wintertime when I plant it in cover crop, if I put a couple of goats in the garden when there was no crops as far as food growing, they would be out in an hour.
Yeah. Keeping
them enclosed in a hot wire, they would be out. Having that garden with a hot wire around it, I never had a goat go in. So weird. They're weird. They don't like to be, enclosed. They don't want to be locked up. Mm-hmm. They want to be able to roam around. Yeah. So maybe the electric fencing, the poultry netting type fencing like Justin Rhodes uses would work. I just never saw that it was feasible to spend the kind of money it would take to put up that much of that, because that poultry netting is expensive.
Yeah. I've seen, so that's what Art and Bree, their channel, I think they're getting their goats out of the pasture. They're trying to clear land. And they're doing that kind of like one little piece. It's not, to me, it doesn't look like it's a thicket. It's just brush a little bit. And I guess it's like forested area. They're just kind of trying to do like a rectangle at a time. I guess that was my thought of like, if I could get enough fencing around a thicket, I wonder if they would be happy with that. Like of just,
well, one thing about goats that I've learned, and it's true with every goat I've ever owned. Okay. So with cows, say cows or horses, if it rains, a cow will just stand there. It doesn't bother a cow to be in the rain. Mm-hmm. Goats do not like to get wet. Okay. So if my goats are out grazing and it starts to sprinkle, it's like a stampede to the barn. So the only problem I would see there is if you don't have shelter for them. Yeah. Goats don't like to be wet. There's a creek that runs through my property. If you've seen very many of my videos, it crosses our driveway. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what allows me to be able to let our goats out to where they're really not fenced into a small area. They can't get to the road. And let's see, in the 7 years we've had goats, I've never had a goat walk across the creek because they refuse to get wet. So, if you're going to be there, well, it would just be a lot of work, in my opinion, trying to move them around without a shelter, where if it's going to rain, then you're going to have to go take the fence down and move them back to where they can get into their shelter.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what you might be able to do is put your barn, let's say you fence off your whole pasture land that you're going to use, the perimeter fence.
Yep.
And then if your barn is kind of more towards the middle, to where you could say use two two short pieces of the poultry netting where you could set up from the barn and set up two fences, one to the main fence this way and one to the main fence this way, and then you could rotate and just move two pieces of that poultry netting where you're not trying to keep them in four sides of just poultry netting. Does that make sense? Where you're only having to move one end of each fence every day or whatever, so they can come back into their barn.
Yeah. And that's what I think. And I do believe that we would be able to have enough pasture for a milk cow and, her calf at some point in our back part of our properties, because that would be roughly 3 acres of, just hopefully at sometime be pasture with scattered like the savanna type look of like some bigger trees with shade and everything for them.
And there's nothing wrong with, say you had your milk cow and her calf and just a couple goats to help eat, because they're going to eat different things. The goat's going to eat a lot of the underbrush that a cow won't touch usually. Well,
yeah, and that would be the thought is, so, and I guess that's the thing is, have you ever done dairy goats?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I have a friend that does a few, but like I said, he's retired from the military, and he can devote as much time to it as he needs to. He gets tired of it. Like, he'll get dairy goats. He got a huge meat goat operation. I mean, he usually has 60 to 80 mama meat goats. He's just a commercial producer, but he enjoys the dairy goat thing. So he'll get 2 or 3 and get real big into milking every day. And then after about 6 months, he says, I need a break. So he sells them. And then about 6 months later, he misses it. So he goes and buys more. I've never really messed with it. Some people say that you can kind of set it up to where it's not as labor intensive as far as keeping your baby goat, instead of just pulling them and strictly bottom. What a lot of people do is pull them in the evening so that the mama goat builds up milk overnight. They'll milk the mama goat and then put the baby with it for the rest of the day. Keeps them, and then if they can't milk the next morning, they just turn the baby in with her.
Okay.
Still, to me, that's still pretty labor intensive for a busy family.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I never really got into it, because one thing was with that friend that had milk goats several times, I would get milk from him, and my family just, goat's milk is very, I don't know. It's like anything else. If you don't know what you're doing and you're not feeding the goats exactly right, if they're eating just a little bit of the wrong kind of grasses or feed or weeds, it changes the taste of the milk. Yeah. And it's so, I mean, from day to day, you can milk the same goat today, and then 2 or 3 days later, the milk will taste totally different. Mm-hmm. So it's finicky, and my family just never really got used to the taste of goat's milk. Okay. It was a thought process, really. It was a mind thing of they're going, that came from a goat.
Yeah.
And it's whole, unpasteurized. It tastes different, So there's a learning curve to getting used to drinking it. And my
well,
it's kind of like eating it. My family just never made it there.
Yeah, there's a farm here in Texas that does raw milk, like cow milk, Jersey. Yeah. And our family loves it. And so I think that's the one thing that I might be able to sell my wife to do it. And that's why for the goats, I just honestly, I hate clearing land, and I don't see us getting any kind of tractor or anything anytime soon. And so the thought of using them to clear some of the property with the thought that we are going to sell them. Okay. So like whenever you buy a steer and you raise it up, can you do the same thing with goats?
You can. A lot of dairy producers are going to pull their kids at 5, 6, 7 days old. So you can buy in the spring around here, you can buy baby dairy goats that are just days old to bottle feed. Oh. They're like on Craigslist, they're everywhere. And a lot of the males are really cheap because they're just not going to go on to produce. There's only going to be so many billies. You know what I mean? Yeah. That people don't need the overflow of male dairy goats. The little does are usually pretty expensive because if they're from a reputable producer, they're going to be more expensive, you know. The problem with doing that is a dairy goat is bred, their body structure is bred and built into them to not produce meat but milk. So you don't get, you can go out and raise all these, you know, little Nubian or Alpine or whatever, you know, wethers that have been castrated males. They're just not going to produce a lot of meat for it. So they're not going to sell. Say you keep them for 8 months and they get up to 60 pounds, they're not going to sell for as much because there's just not as much meat on them as a true meat goat. With my Kikos or something that's more of a goat, they're going to go from that newborn 10 pounds to 50 pounds a lot faster. They're going to put on muscle because that's what they're bred to do. So could you make it profitable with the, you know, excess dairy goats? It just depends on how much people are going to charge you for their young babies. And then do you want to be bottle feeding? Bottle feeding any animal is expensive. Milk replacer cost is expensive. So I don't know. It's one of those things with just a few goats. Can you make it profitable? I don't know. But is it really about making money, or is it about clearing your land? Because if it's about clearing your land, they don't really necessarily have to make money because they're doing the job for you, which means you're not out there clearing the land, which saves you money or saves you time. You're not paying someone else to clear the land. So
totally. Yeah. I think for us, it is clear the land, learn a new skill, animal husbandry from, you know, suburban, you know, suburban people who have never done this before. And to take baby steps to be able to do that. And then with the thought that with this animal, we will need an exit strategy, because if they do their job correctly, eventually we want them to improve the property and not cause us a lot of headaches with parasites and everything. Because that's what Joe Salatin said, is like, it's a goat wants to eat with its head up, and once it has to eat with its head down, that's whenever parasites become a really big issue.
Absolutely.
And so the thought that eventually they're going to eat themselves out of a job. So how do we get rid of them? And is there a market that we can unload them?
Absolutely. I mean, Texas, you're in Texas. Texas is probably one of the largest producers of goats in the country. I mean, I can promise you that there are auctions around Oklahoma. There's several that are just tailored just to goats. And 90% of the goats that are sold in Oklahoma are loaded onto a truck and they take them to San Angelo, Texas. San Angelo, Texas is the home of one of the largest goat sales auctions in the country. Like the guy that takes my goats, you know, I've got a friend that he's basically just an order buyer. He does cattle too, but his big thing is goats. And he goes to all these auctions and buys goats for, you know, he'll have, say he's got somebody that says, hey, I need 300 goats. You know, he goes to all the little auctions and buys them up, loads them up on a semi, and takes them to somebody, and they end up going to San Angelo, Texas once they get to a certain weight.
Yeah.
So you're in Texas. I can almost guarantee you there's plenty of places to sell goats. Even if you just go with online, if you just list them on Facebook or Craigslist. That was Craigslist. I probably sold more goats over the years on Craigslist than I have anywhere. I mean, there's always
just to individuals.
Just to individuals. And I do that with a lot of my livestock. You know, if I have, say, you know, I've got a lot of chickens and they hatch out a bunch of babies, and after a few months I've got all these roosters running around. If I decide I don't want to butcher them, I just post them on Craigslist, and they're sold within a couple days usually. There's always a place to sell livestock. There's always going to be, you know, somebody looking to buy.
Gotcha.
Especially Texas.
That's good. Okay, good. I'm glad that I never even thought about Craigslist. I don't know why. I guess I thought that I would have to go to some kind of formal, you know, like auction or something to get rid of them or to even buy them. So that's a good idea.
And there's probably, more than likely, I mean, I don't know exactly where your farm's going to be, but there's probably a goat auction not, more than 30, 40 miles away from there if you're in rural Texas.
We're right in the middle of Houston, Austin, and Dallas. So we're in that, in the middle of those three big cities. So I would assume that there's something in, around there.
Absolutely.
Dude, Daniel, thank you, man. Thank you for hopping on and doing this on your Saturday. For everybody if they haven't seen your channel, how can they find out about you?
Well, we're on YouTube, Arms Family Homestead. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat. Facebook is easy. It's just Arms Family Homestead. On Instagram, it's my name, Daniel Arms. I switched it just because I have so many friends, personal friends that are on there that are like, I can't find you on Instagram, so I just switched it to my name. But right now, it's Arms Family Homestead on YouTube. A lot of times I guess I get to in a routine of posting videos all the time, and I guess people get the confusion that I live full time here on the property. Well, I do live full time here. My full time job is at home, and that's not true. This is just I still work full time, but this lifestyle I just want to share with people. YouTube is a way to share. My message is, hey, I'm a full time family guy. I have a full-time job, and we are able to produce so much of our own food just as a hobby almost. I mean, I don't take it super serious. If my garden fails, bummer. But I'm not to the point where I have to depend on that to survive. Anybody can go out in their garden. They can change their flower beds from tulips to tomatoes and produce some of their own food. That's what I want to try across to people. Once you go out and produce some of your own food, whether it's vegetables or rabbits or, whatever, there's just an awesome feeling of like I did this. And that's what I'm about.
Well, so yeah, go check out Arms Family Homestead. Daniel, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, man. Good luck. I hope you get everything lined out so you can get to your homestead and live that life as soon as possible.
Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today. Super stoked. I can't wait. Hopefully in the time that we are going to be homeless living up in Dallas, and while our shed to house cabin is going to be built, that I'll be able to come up there and hang out with you and see your farm. So super excited. So be sure to go over to the Arms Family Homestead and subscribe to Daniel's channel. And hey, when you get there, let him know that Better Together Life sent you, and say hello to Houston. Seriously, Houston and Ollie, they need to hang out. These two boys, just awesome, cool boys, toe-headed, blondie boys. I think they're gonna have a good time together. So, subscribe to Daniel Together Life. Go. Ollie, subscribe. Daniel, Arms Family Homestead. Go do it. And also, if you haven't, be sure to click the link below to where you get our free ebook, 50 Homestead Moneymakers. Links down below. Get that link. Get the free ebook right down there. Okay, goodbye.